Sure. Hello, everyone. Welcome to NBK Night School. My name is Obi. We have this school every other Tuesday, and hopefully we can have this in person very soon. Political education is very important, as you all know, because you're all here. It's important that we get out of the liberal belief that our betters should decide everything for us, and we should adopt more of a democratic belief that politics is something that we all do and something we all engage in, and we should decide and choose for ourselves. And we have Tascha and Michael here to talk to us about elections in the state. Tascha was on the Brooklyn Electoral OC from 2017 to 2019, managed Julia Salazar's 2018 campaign and Friars Who Front Forest 2020 campaign, and now works for Friar in the Assembly. Michael held various positions on the organizing committee of Brooklyn Electoral Working Group from 2017 to 2019. He is now active in Philadelphia's DSA Electoral Committee. He works at a union in Pennsylvania, and I'd like to pass it on to you two.
Hey, we're really excited to be here. I think what we're planning to do is talk through the NYC-DSA Electoral Strategy, which was part of the reading for tonight, but we'll talk through it if you haven't read it, that we were part of writing in 2017 and have sort of watched evolve over the course of the past 5 years. And then we'll talk about some of the new challenges we're encountering as now we are engaging more directly with the state, with many socialists in the state legislature. Tascha, do you want to kick off the?
Yeah, the electoral strategy. I think it might be interesting to start just like with a little bit of the lay of the land of like where things were in DSA and electoral at the start of 2016. Oh my God, no, 2017. So I think Michael and I both joined DSA roughly at the same time. You might have joined a little bit before me, Michael, but I know that when I joined, there was things were very different. Everything was new. There was a ton of new membership. Many of you probably remember there was a ton of energy. And I went immediately towards the electoral working group because I had just done a ton of stuff on Bernie's campaign. And I knew that that's what I really particularly wanted to get plugged into. And one thing I remember at the time was that there was Michael, I feel like I'm gonna do this sort of lay of the land, and then maybe you can get into like the nitty gritty of the strategy, which I feel like you'll be better at breaking down. But I remember that there was a lot more critique of if NYC-DSA should pursue electoral work than there is now. Obviously, we hadn't really had the experience of a winning campaign, and there was just a lot of discussion. There was a lot of energy for it, but I think also a lot of skepticism about electoral work. And I remember I came into the organization really excited to do electoral work, but mostly really excited because it felt like a place to sort of reimagine how that work could look and how it could be different from typical electoral work. I had, prior to DSA, worked on a variety of campaigns, starting like way back on the Obama campaign in 2008. And had worked in a variety of roles, often volunteering on campaigns. And even quite frankly, on the Bernie 2015, 2016 race, had done a ton of volunteer work, but had like not a great experience with the campaign itself. And I think like I had not a great experience with the campaign itself and on a lot of different races. And so I remember coming into DSA, and there was a lot of critique and sort of this, like, should we do electoral work or should we do other work? And I remember feeling immediately like it should be both, like they're complementary. And I think a lot of people felt this way. But one thing that I think was really important is that a lot of the critiques of electoral work at that time were very valid. And, you know, I think a lot of people had this fear that, you know, sort of like mass organization and the democratic structures that we were building out could just sort of be consumed by a campaign that just sucks everybody into it. And then all of the resources, all the people go to this campaign and to that person, and none of that gets retained in the organization. And so there was a lot of really valid critique. And in 2017, we endorsed, just to recap for anybody who wasn't in the organization at that time or isn't aware, we had two races. One was Khader El-Yateem in Bay Ridge, and the other one was Jabari Bridgeport in Crown Heights, and both for city council races. And while we lost both races, we did really well in the El-Yateem race, and considering that he was a candidate that, you know, most people who were like political professionals, you know, were like, there's no way he has a chance. No. And he did pretty well. Michael, I don't know if you remember the exact margin. I don't remember. Okay. And then Jabari, running on the Green Party line, also did pretty well considering he was on the Green Party line. So it was, I think one thing we did that year, thank you, Nycdsa, 600 votes, 650 votes. But I think one of the things that we did that year that was really, really important was, as an organization, was figure out how to work on campaigns in a way that built power for the organization, and that built leadership also. And I think you build power through one of the ways to build power is by building leadership. And I think we did a lot of experimenting that year and tried a lot of things. And even though we lost those two races, I think we came out, the electoral strategy was written coming out of those two races and everything that we had learned from those two races, with an eye for moving forward into 2018. So I'm gonna kick it over to you, Michael, for the strategy itself.
Yeah, totally. I think I really loved coming back to this document for this talk, because I think it gets at the way strategic discussion, sort of like, and a consensus strategy comes out of practice, right? Like we were learning a lot about how to do elections and how we wanted to do elections, and also debate, right? Like there was a larger tendency in DSA then than there is now to make the loud critique of elections as like a movement killer, an organization sucker, right? Like and an individualist approach to politics that built power for individual candidates. And I think my first reaction was to be very hostile to that analysis. But over time, like talking to more experienced people, very much including Tascha, and just sort of like working through campaigns, I came to be, I think we all came to realize that we were really sympathetic to those critiques, right? That electoral politics as it's usually practiced, which centers the candidate, right? Like all of the sort of like prestige of the election goes through the candidate, centers the campaign, where like whoever is on the campaign staff has all the power, and anyone else who's participating is just donating their time and is, maybe a super volunteer if they do a lot, but like is basically considered a source of free labor rather than an organizer with their own sort of power and responsibility. That and the way that campaigns end, and whoever has engaged with them and gotten excited by them is just sort of kicked to the curb, right? until next cycle, we sort of like looked at those and we were like, that's a really bad situation. And we never ever want to do elections like that. And we also saw, I think, that the way that Kader and Jabari related to the organization and the way that DSA members related to him was really positive and promising, and was sort of like it suggested that there could be a consensus with DSA around doing elections if given the right electoral structure and strategy. So so we sat down to write this with that with that in mind, like the possibility of its being a consensus. And I think we also sat down to write it with like recent hands-on experience of how campaigns work in practice in our hands. I mean, in some cases, like Tascha certainly, and Asher Ross and Jasmine and Sam Lewis. Most people besides me were much more deeply experienced in campaigns, but all of us were coming out of 6 months of campaigning, and we had a really clear sense of like how that process works, and an assessment that like if you want to do elections better in a way that's organizationally richer, that builds more collective power, that trains people more, you need to focus on like the practice of it. And I want to put that sort of in contrast to I think often on the left, in concerns about electoral accountability, there's like a psychodrama of the candidate, like an assessment that's like, the problem is that the candidate is secretly a liberal or secretly not loyal to us, or even if they are loyal to us now, they're going to get into office, they'll be under a lot of pressure, they won't do it. And the dynamic is sort of like you're handing off a lot of power to the candidate and then worrying about whether they're going to like treat the power well. And we did some of that is a really valid consideration, but we sort of changed the emphasis and said, like, let's not hand off the power to the extent possible. Like, let's think about the practice of doing elections and like hold the power collectively, hold the everything from the field infrastructure to the messaging to the data that's produced to the organizers that are trained to the prestige that's sort of won by winning, right? Let's make that part of the organization, and let's think about accountability from the perspective of like, how do we put ourselves as an organization in a position to wield and continue to wield power, rather than like, how do we pick the right individual to trust with our power. So that, I think it's sort of boring to talk about to this group about like how exactly that happens, because we've all sort of experienced how DSA does campaigns, but like those were the impulses, and that's, I think, where we came from. Tascha, what am I missing here?
No, I don't think much. I think the strategy itself, I remember feeling like really kind of relieved to see something written down that expressed, I think, what a lot of people have experienced in electoral politics outside of DSA, that basically, walks through like, this is how typical campaigns run, and in this way, and this is what we'll do differently. And I think, I think one thing that's really, really valuable to like look at and think about when we're thinking about our electoral campaigns and looking and reading through the electoral strategy is, I don't know, I'm sure everybody has like variety of experiences that they've had prior to joining DSA. I know that a lot of experience I had on the left was kind of desperately trying to find some way to plug in to things for years, and, trying different things, going to marches, going to meetings, doing like learning about something, meeting different people. And I tried for so many years to plug into different things, including like Occupy Wall Street. And for me, I think like a really, really important essence of our electoral strategy is there's just like all of these really direct and clear paths to getting plugged into like concrete work, where you become part of a project that has a really specific and clear goal, where you're working with other people who care about the same thing that you do, and where you're learning about something you likely didn't know anything about, like just like, a week prior or whatever it is. And to me, for me, that's like the fundamental, that was the fundamental missing piece for me in politics on the left, was like, how, like, yes, I care about this. You don't have to convince me, I'm on the same page, but what am I doing? Like, what is the thing that I'm doing? And what I love about our electoral strategy and our campaigns, and we're here to talk about, elections in the state, but like not just our electoral campaigns in DSA at this point, we've gotten really good at being strategic with all sorts of campaigns, is that like they give you a really clear path to involvement and to learning things, and to learning how to be a leader and work with other people towards a very specific, very concrete goal that builds power for lots of people. So for me, I remember once that document was written and we were discussing it and it got passed. I think it was passed in the first CLC meeting that ever happened, if I'm remembering that correctly. I remember it was just like really, really exciting. So I was like, this is like actually written down and like solves the like, what am I doing problem, which sounds kind of silly and simple, but I think is for me anyway, was always a really big challenge in getting involved on the left.
Yeah.
So how did the electoral strategy work out for us?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's like looking back on it, right? Like our political horizon at that moment was like, we had done 2 elections, we had lost both times, but we felt like we could win, which like in no way went without saying, right? Like if like people talked a lot about people running as like open socialists back then, like the idea of being an open socialist, because the presumption was like socialism was too scary a word, you couldn't win that way, right? And like the political horizon and this I think now we have new problems, right? Which I think we'll talk about in a few minutes. But the political horizon was, can we win even one race? And the political horizon was, can we use that to become stronger as an organization? And I think the answer to both of those questions was, right, like, yes. Like, I think we more or less did what we said we would do collectively as a chapter in this document. Both in terms of like we built an independent electoral machine, and it strengthened the chapter organizationally, and it accomplished, I think, some of the goals. Like we talk about the value of electing someone is, you have someone in office, you scare everyone else who holds office in your terrain. You let them know that you can command majority support and move things. Yeah, that's it. What do you think, Tascha?
I think it's worked out pretty well. I mean, I kind of have an anecdote that hopefully is like illustrative of like the power of our organization and what we bring to the table, even at like an earlier day on Julia's 2018 race. So Michael and I worked together on Julia Salazar's race in 2018. And that was, it's really hard to state how different things were then politically in terms of like how people, reacted to us as an organization, and what people saw that we brought to the table. I don't think I feel like we were in like the confusion phase where people in politics were like confused about us. And I remember being like, ooh, that's good. Like they're confused now and hopefully soon they're scared. But like at that point they were like confused about us. They were like, what is this? Like, what is going on? And so we, it was a couple months into Julia's campaign, and there was, there was a politician who supported Julia and who, but was really worried that we didn't know what we were doing, and wanted some sort of, control over the campaign, or wanted to make sure that we were like doing the right things and being strategic and smart. And some of that is totally fine and good. If you endorse somebody, you want them to win, you want them to be strategic and smart, but there's also an element of like, I'll introduce you to my friends who will tell you the right way to do things. And thus you're sort of building relationships through this very specific path in politics. And one of the things they wanted us to do was to work with a consultancy and to bring on a consultancy who would, for free, look at all of our data and basically tell us what we needed to do. And I knew already that there was no way this could happen because we had this really strong field team, and our field team was entirely led by DSA. And we had already gotten to a very firm place of feeling like, you know what, we are about like making this information, sort of democratizing it, bringing this information outside of those sort of like consultancy class in New York, because basically political consultants will kind of like hoard information and relationships and run campaigns. And then they are the ones that benefit from the work of like, if there's volunteers from their work, from all of the work along with the candidate. And so we had a pretty solid, belief that like, we don't want consultants. We certainly in field, we don't need consultants. We can do this on our own. We 100% believed it. And I knew that if we as a campaign, so I was like working for the campaign at that part, I knew that if the campaign hired a consultancy, our field team would just be like, fuck that, like there would be like a revolt, like literally it would, and even if I stepped away from my involvement with DSA and deep commitment to the organization, if I just like stepped into the like campaign manager role and like, we need to have volunteers and move forward, and I need expertise, and there's people who hold the keys to some of the expertise on this campaign, there was no way I was going to cross that line and be like, sure, we'll do whatever you want, like powerful political person. And it having DSA as the like fundamental base of this campaign gave me a position and like this sort of a position of strength to say like, thank you, but no, thank you. And it was obviously like the right thing to do. We totally did know what we were doing. At that point in time, a lot of people who are professionals in politics told us at many different points, oh, you're doing the wrong thing. You're not doing like X random thing enough. You're not sending out enough mailers. Your candidate isn't doing this like very specific, weird, random thing that we've decided in like the professional political world is necessary to win a race. And I think if we hadn't have had this sort of like enormous capacity that we were able to sort of like tap into through DSA, it would have been a lot harder to navigate those things. But I remember feeling like crystal clear about what the most important thing was on that campaign, because there was just like no other option. And so like, I think like it's really important to remember that like the organization brings something to candidates that they don't get anywhere else in the world of electoral politics. a sort of like true, like grassroots, volunteer-led, but very, very smart. And at this point, we certainly have more knowledge about electoral and how to run like electoral campaigns than many, many, many professionals.
Yeah, fuck consultants, man. Yeah, and that's, I think it's just worth saying, right? Like that's us, like a small part of what a party is or what a political machine is, right? Like there are a lot of different things that a party is in the US, right? It's a ballot line, it's a donor network, it's an ideology or a brand. Something people don't think about that much, but that is like really, really important at the state and local level, is that it's a pool of technical expertise, right? And a professional network that holds that expertise. And that's like how, you know, like that is a candidate, you know, a normal sort of hack machine candidate in Brooklyn from 2010, like they really relied on that, on all of that. And that wasn't, you know, it wasn't like a deep personal loyalty to Frank Sedio necessarily that kept people attached to that machine, but it's that the people who control access to that kind of knowledge have real power. Lawyers, consultants, donors, like all those people.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think one of the most empowering things for me ever was doing volunteer stuff on Bernie's campaign in New York City, and getting to know institutions who, you know, are supposed experts in electoral politics, and experiencing sort of firsthand how, like, I was like, oh, I know more. I didn't know that much at that point. Oh, I know more. Like I'm more organized than that. Or like just sort of realizing that the experts are not really expert on anything, certainly not on anything that we can't learn ourselves. And we can probably learn it in a much better way.
Hey, how are you?
Should we move on to the state?
Yeah.
Can you frame it, Michael?
Oh yeah. So the first part of our talk was about how we had figured out elections, and the rest of our talk is going to be about how we have not figured out the state. No, it's so I think like just closing out the conversation about the electoral strategy, like it's an electoral strategy for building a strong organization that gets people into office. It's not a theory at all, right? Of like what they should do in office, how they should be as electeds, how they should relate to the organization as elected officials. As, you know, elected officials who, in one way, they have like a lot of power from you know, they're paid full time to represent the district. They get to be in on the secret discussions to some extent where laws are made. In another way, right, very, very little power. Like if you get someone into the position of being a freshman assembly person, and you got there by primarying a good friend of the Speaker of the Assembly, and they're one of 4 or 5 state assembly members who are identified socialists, and everyone up there is like scared of them and hates them, right? And it's a body, yet the state assembly has like 150 people in it, right? So like what opportunities open to them and open to us as an organization, like when we've built this small caucus. And it's, in a way, it's like you've you've sweated and climbed to the top of like a small hill, and then you look out over the horizon, there's like a giant mountain ahead of you. The giant mountain is sorry, Joe, can you mute? Thank you. The giant mountain is like, how do we sort of wield power in the state? And I think like that's a long-term problem. I think the lesson I would take from our experience with the electoral strategy, as we collectively, like all of us, develop this strategy of legislation and of state power, is that we have to be thinking simultaneously on two fronts, like, right? Like, how do we win what we can win this year? And also, how do we at every step run our strategy in a way that builds the organization, builds the power and leadership and knowledge of like, not like, you know, a couple of people on the steering committee, but of the whole organization, so that we're smarter, more capable, better organized to win more next year, right? Because I think that's really the power of our electoral strategy, is that we do it in a way that builds the organization. That always has to be the consideration for our legislative strategy too. Okay, so that's the frame. Tascha, you know a million times more about what's in it than me.
Well, I think it's like maybe what I'll do is just quickly frame the Socialists in Office project, because it's a new part of our chapter. And I think a lot of people in the chapter aren't familiar with all of it. So I'll just like quickly like summarize what it is. So basically at the start of the year, we started a committee called Socialists in Office. And basically what this is just a committee that meets weekly, every week, plus longer meetings interspersed in there. And it is all of the state elected. So right now there's actually 2 Socialists in Office committees. There's another one now for the city council electeds. I'm going to talk about the state one because I don't know very much about the city council SIO, but basically it's all of the electeds, staff that they include in the meetings. So I just for transparency, join these calls and I'm in this committee with Farah's office. And then it is steering reps and then a representative from each of the state priority campaigns. So it's a big group. It's like, usually it's like 30 plus people. And basically all year have been meeting weekly to figure out how to do this. And I think that, the topics of conversation, have ranged from like, learning about a priority campaign and the bills. Like I remember that was happening a lot at the beginning of the year. And I was like, oh, okay, this is clear. This is good. This is easy. Tell me about the Build Public Renewables Act. Great. Okay, got it. No problem. To like talking about very like complicated political dynamics that our electeds have to kind of navigate every day. And, for me, I know now more than ever, one of the things I really love about elections is that it's very like, in a sense, mathematical. You have a win number and you have to talk to a lot of voters. And so to a certain degree, you can like really like increase your odds of winning a lot if you just hit that win number. And there's actually like not as much sort of like power dynamics to navigate and relationships to navigate, even though there's a huge opportunity, I think, through our campaigns to build a lot of relationships and build a lot of power. It's a little more clear how you do it. In the legislature, it's a lot harder. So our electeds have to, build relationships with other electeds. You just have to. If you want to introduce a bill and you want people to sign on to it, they have to want to pick up your phone call, and they have to want to listen to you and talk to you. If you want to move your bill, you have to be able to, be on speaking terms and talk to like the committee chair of the committees that it moves through. At the same time, our electeds are all like very deeply committed to building a movement and building this organization through the work they do. And then so what that requires is a lot of like education, educating members. I think our educating DSA members on like what's going on in Albany. I think all of our electeds are really committed to sort of, doing a lot of the things we just talked about with electoral work, like sort of pulling back the curtain on things in Albany and really like breaking down, we went through this at the beginning of the year with the budget. What the hell is the budget? Like, how does this work? It's funny, we had like a lot of like, sort of like the stages of the budget trainings before the budget happened, during the budget happening. And I don't think I'm alone in saying, like, as a staff member, I was still completely confused and like perplexed and had no idea what was happening through almost the entire process. The thing about the state and the legislature is that it's very opaque. It's designed that way. It's very hard to penetrate, and it's not just hard to penetrate for like people walking around on the street, like thinking about, whatever it is they need or whatever issues they care about. It is actually, I think the thing that I was most surprised by is it's also actually opaque and hard to penetrate for legislators. And so I think, those two things, sort of building relationships with people inside the legislature in Albany and breaking open, like cracking this door open and like letting like light in and bringing people into the process. Cause that's our goal, is like bring people into this process. Those two things are in tension with each other, like pretty deep tension with each other. And so this year, especially the first half of the year, there's a lot of conversation devoted to like, what is our theory of power, and like, what brings it, what builds power, where is power coming from? How do we bring in DSA members without completely torching relationships with other legislators? It's really, really, really hard and really tricky. But I think what I want to say about it too is that like, it's so exciting that we are in this place where we're figuring this out. Like we had to elect a slate of people, like multiple legislators, to be able to be in this position where we can actually sort of work through it. And so that's like, there's so much to dig into on any specific angle. And if there's something specific people are curious about, I hope they ask in the Q&A. But that's basically what the Socialist in Office is. And, now we're heading into, 2022. I don't know, I'm having a really hard time with years tonight. Having like a year panic attack. And we're, it's like kind of an interesting moment because we, now the legislators aren't like brand new. We have the staff like have some understanding of how the year is going to go next year. So, now we're kind of in this stage of like planning for next year. The other thing, and I'm just going to say this quickly because I know I've been talking for a bit and we probably have to move on to Q&A soon, but the other thing we've obviously been talking a lot about is district organizing and how to use our elected's office as a place to organize the district and do deeper organizing in the district, especially in the off season when there aren't electoral campaigns around specific issues, around priorities, tenant organizing, et cetera. And that is another big giant piece that we are, I think, as a committee, as an organization, still figuring out like how to do, because I think that was something also that, you know, we all like have a deep commitment to. All of our electeds are super, super committed to this. But in practice is harder and more complicated, I think, than we thought. But I think also really, really, I'm super excited for district organizing and to see how it develops over the next year. But Socialists in office, that's how we're operating right now. And Michael, I think you had said this when we were chatting about the call, that there's like just like nothing, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about this, but there's like nothing really out there that works this way. Or maybe I can't remember who said it. I think it was you, Michael, but that this is like a really unique thing that we're doing. Nobody else is doing it. There aren't other legislators that have this kind of like trusted, like we're on like 30 plus people calls talking about really sensitive stuff all the time. And it's a really trusted, wonderful, supportive group and we're all like kind of navigating this thing together, which is really exciting. And yeah, I don't think exists really anywhere else.
Thank you so much, both of you. And now we're going to go to Q&A. But before then, Obi is going to just go over our community agreement. Obi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Everyone is here to learn. Please assume good intentions, to be comradely, the golden rule, treat everyone how you want to be treated. If you have a question, use stack. Just write the word stack in the chat and we will call on you. Please keep your questions brief and under 30 seconds. Keep the context and the anecdotes to a minimum. Now I'll pass it off to Doug.
Yeah, I'm going to usurp my role here by asking the first question, and then everyone else can jump in, and I'll call on people as I see the word stack. What exactly is the long-term goal of all this? Just win one election after another and hope to reach a majority? How does it relate to non-electoral work? And is the idea some kind of gradual encroachment on bourgeois control of the state and the means of production? Just like gradually until we, win office after office, and then finally we have a majority, and then the socialist utopia takes hold. I mean, how does the day-to-day work fit into a long-term strategy? Is there a long-term strategy?
Michael, you should take this.
I think that's a good question. I think the answer just the right question isn't whether I have a long-term strategy, right? It's whether DSA has a long-term strategy. And I think the answer is unambiguously no, right? We do not, as an organization, have a sort of vision for how what we're doing now builds all the way to the world we want to see. I think that in the course of the conversations that Tascha was describing, like those 30 people and all of us together beginning to understand the sort of like possibilities and limits of the amount of power we have now. I think that needs to continue, but I would say, I guess, Doug, I don't know if I was misreading your tone, but you're sort of like, is the idea just to elect one person after another until we get socialism? And I'm like, certainly, yes, we're not going to get socialism without a supermajority support, right? And so the fact that it seems unimaginable to get that step by step through state Senate elections, but it feels unimaginable to get it any other way. It feels a little bit less remote than it did 5 years ago, is the best I can say about it. But yeah, like the reason our legislators don't have a lot of power in Albany is because 10 million, only a couple 100,000 rather than 10 million New Yorkers voted for them and put them there, right?
Okay, Tascha, do you want to say anything, or should I just move on to a next question?
You can move on to the next.
Okay, I think Mia is the first one I see.
Yes, thank you so much for your talks. My question is like kind of related to that, I guess, too, because I'm kind of been thinking a lot lately about like where NYC in particular is going with, their electoral wins and like, endorsements coming up. and you know, to what extent we've hit like a certain threshold of victories or of capacity. It's a conversation we have a lot in DSA. So my question, especially in light of like maybe in the context of other smaller chapters where there very much is still a debate over like, is electoral politics worth it? I was wondering if you guys could talk a little more in detail. I know you said a little bit about how you like navigated those conversations, you know, a few years ago in DSA when the consensus was very much not necessarily electoral politics, and how to have that kind of conversation.
Yeah, I'm definitely like on the capacity question. I feel like a big goal of ours should just always be to bring in, like one of our goals should be to bring in as many people as possible, and grow the organization and the movement. I think, and to that end, I always feel like we should be pushing ourselves and doing more than we've done, which I know can feel like a little bit of a daunting thing after this last year, and the city council races this last year, where I think, you know, it felt a little stunning after sweeping the state races the prior year. But we still got 2 more people into office. I think like the thing with electoral work that's kind of tricky for chapters, for a lot of chapters, and something that I think is important for us here is like, I think we were really, really lucky in New York City, just timing wise, and you know, with how things kind of played out in our chapter in electoral work, and who was, you know, we were really lucky to have an oddly large number of people with electoral experience, but who were very skeptical of the current electoral system at the same time, which was like a really important combination for us starting our electoral work. We had a lot of people who had worked for WFP, so had really like doing field, so had really, really like practical field knowledge on like how to run campaigns and how to canvass and how to knock door, like all of these things that are really like our bread and butter. But also people who were like truly on the left, and I think, you know, similar to me, had disappointing experiences working on campaigns or volunteering for campaigns, in just like how that builds power, more simply like doesn't build power. And I think the thing that's really hard for a new chapter, I was on the National Electoral Committee for a bit, and so had a lot of conversations with chapters, is it's really hard to, you either have nobody, I found that like when chapters, especially smaller chapters who have like smaller numbers of people, are thinking about like, okay, so who runs this campaign? Like what are our next steps? Often have the option of like people with no electoral experience, so don't know anything about how to run a campaign yet being like a really important word, because these are all like very learnable skills, or in some cases like somebody, it's often just like one person who's like the campaign expert, like the resident expert of campaigns, who's gonna like tell her, who's like bringing all these really bad practices from like typical campaigns into the world of DSA, where it just sort of like can inflame the problem or like stall it. And so I think it's really how to start like electoral work in some chapters is a tricky one, because I think understanding what good electoral practices are, I kind of have the opinion that you kind of need to experience it on some level, or really deeply like be involved with something parallel to it to understand like how it kind of works and how to move forward a campaign that is both like functional and like deeply attached to the organization. But also like the chapters need to build up to it. Like we didn't run Kader Al-Yateem's campaign, you know, we had a smaller goal on that first race that we did, where we were like, we're going to identify 1,000 positive supporters. And we, at that point in 2017, didn't have the capacity or understanding of how to just like take on a whole campaign in the way that we are able to now. But I think that the National Electoral Committee is doing like good work now, some interesting work. And now that electoral work is prioritized on the national level through this past convention, I think that's really positive. But I think there just needs to be more support for chapters and more help as they're like in those early stages of building an electoral campaign, because it's really hard, I think. Sorry, it was a really long answer. I'll be quicker next time.
All right, looks like Franklin Moreno. Moreno is next.
Hey guys, how are you? Hey.
Hi.
Yeah. Nice weekend so far. I have a question. How election day is coming? Election day is coming in November to vote a president and the mayor and the governor.
Can you repeat that? I didn't catch the entire question.
How shut down all the communities, all the bases, and how shut down all schools, all restaurants, bases, everything, Tascha.
Sorry, I don't think I understand the question.
Okay, anyone else want to take that, or should I move on to next person, Brian Shaitkin?
No, wait, excuse me. How shut down restaurants, schools, and bases, Tascha?
You're asking how to shut down schools?
Yeah, before 2020.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that. It's sort of outside of our expertise.
Yeah, schools reopened September before last year. All schools reopened already, Tascha.
Oh, yeah. I don't think I have a good answer for that.
Thank you, Tascha. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
No.
Brian, you were next.
Thanks, Doug. Tascha, question for you. As it's worked out over the last few election cycles, the DSA has won more races at the state level than the city level. If you had your choice, would you rather have a large caucus in the city council or in the state assembly and the state senate?
State assembly and state senate. 100%. It's just what affects our day-to-day. It's like so the legislation there has just such a deep impact on our lives and affects like most of the big things, from like housing to climate, healthcare, just across the board. So yeah.
Michael, you want to say something about that? Or you
no, I
Pennsylvaniaized? Okay, who is next here? It looks like Jeremy.
Hey, Michael and Tascha, thank you for the great presentations. I guess I have a question. You know, typically I think when like socialists talk about the state, they tend to talk about all the ways in which it is like impossible, like democracy is a sham. It's impossible to get anything out of it. Like the, capitalist class has like control of all the levers. And I think like, I'm wondering sort of how that kind of big picture view that I think we like to some degree share as socialists, how you think about that relating to the kind of the nuts and bolts activity of like building the organization, running different kinds of campaigns, like how you sort of think about those two different levels of kind of how we think about like government and the state. Because I admit to sometimes myself having the issue where like in my mind, I'm like, there's not much to be said for this, whole society and it's all falling to pieces. And then on the other hand, like, oh, there's a lot of work to do. So that was one question. And then the other question, I was just curious, it seems to me like a kind of sister project, but maybe with also quite a few differences, is like the DSA and WFP. And I'm curious, like kind of how you would assess like what they share, and also what keeps the DSA from, to put it gently, becoming the maybe aspects of the WFP that we don't care for so much in the future.
Michael, you should go first.
Jeremy's like, the state, what do you think? And also for a follow-up, I don't know. I mean, I don't think, right, that the state is like a certain group of armed men in the Lenin way, right now anymore, right? Like it's an institution that, like, most of its budget goes to sort of pensions for the elderly and healthcare, that like intervenes in tenant disputes, that does a ton of policing and a ton of military stuff, and also does, it's like densely contested terrain. I don't know. I don't necessarily think of like any given election as, I mean, it's like I work at a union, right? And you organize a new shop and you organize another new shop, and it's sort of good in itself. And it puts you in a slightly better position to do whatever comes next. Right? You're a little bit better organized. You're a little bit harder to fuck with. And like there isn't, I don't know that we're in a position to sort of map out how building those nodes of power sort of gets us all the way along the road to abolishing the state. But I think we can say we're better positioned to do whatever we need to do than we were last year. On the WFP, I think I'm like the most WFP sympathetic person in NYC-DSA. I think the project is a really powerful and interesting one, and I think the first thing that the WFP was, when it started out and was for a decade and a half of New York politics, was an attempt to align the labor movement around a progressive political strategy. In other words, to build a workers' party, right? But with the actually existing labor movement, not with the labor movement we want to see. And I think it was quite like within the terms of New York politics from the year 2000 to 2016, it was like relatively successful, and as successful as we can be at coordinating the labor movement until the labor movement transforms itself. I think the risk for DSA and all the compromises that the left hates about WFP like came out of the labor movement, right? Like that's because because specific unions have deep, important relationships that get them either real things or fake things, but things they believe in, but sometimes real things with the Democratic Party power establishment. And if you're gonna try to build in solidarity with the labor movement, you have to deal with that. I think the risk for DSA is not really of wandering into WFP territory, but of choosing not to wrestle with the problem that WFP wrestled with, which is sort of like, how can we build a broad enough coalition on a broad enough social base to really change things, right? Like, we're never going to have to endorse Cuomo in 2014 or whatever, because we're never going to be in coalition and alignment with 1199 and these massive unions that have deep bases in our powerful parts of New York politics. And I think that's right. But like, I think we should sort of wrestle with and acknowledge what it means to be going it alone in some of the ways we are. And I think if we wrestled with it a little harder, we would respect some of the choices WFD has made a little more.
Tascha, do you want to say anything, or should I go to the next question?
I'll just add really quickly to the WFP question. For me, like the biggest difference is, or important difference for me is that we, we're really and truly led by our members, and we have this really important goal of like debating openly, and now in the Socialist in Office Committee, like working through problems as a slate, and sort of figuring out these problems openly rather than having sort of secret, sort of closed relationships with individual people in power around the state. To me, that's a very big difference. We're kind of trying to like eliminate the sort of backroom, closed deals that happen all the time. And it's a lot harder to do things that way. But I think that it's like a really important piece of what we're doing.
Okay, looks like Polly, am I saying that right? Wheatley Rutner is next on the list.
Close enough.
Okay.
Hey y'all, really good to hear from you tonight. Question I have is about people being motivated to work on electoral campaigns and feeling confident enough about the outcomes. You pointed out early on that people were like really jaded about typical electoral campaigns. Totally feel that, having worked on them myself. But I feel this growing concern over like, okay, we elect these people. How do we know that they're going to fight for us? Which you alluded to, Michael. And this definitely applies more federally, but we're seeing a lot of conversation around that with like AOC, who NYC-DSA did campaign for, but has the organization, likely not in the electoral working group, but have other parts of the organization wrestled with or considered how to run accountability campaigns? Or maybe not necessarily when it gets that far, but just keeping people the organization campaign for to like have some fidelity to DSA's principles and priorities.
I can jump in on that real quick. So I think that like, I think the word like accountability is sort of like, it means different things to different people. But I think that like, there's a reason why when we talk about like our state electeds in New York, we're talking about them in a very different way than when we talk about like federal electeds. And I think that, I think you can sort of see like, there's a big difference with how they were elected and how DSA endorsed the candidates. And federal races, congressional races are a lot harder because they're like bigger, there's more players. So DSA, I don't think, to my knowledge, has had like total ownership and completely led a congressional campaign in the way that we have on the state level. And I think like what it does, I think like I want, when I think of accountability, I feel like I want to have electeds, basically what we're doing in the Socialists in Office. I want to have electeds who have the same mission that we do, that are part of our organization, that feel a commitment to this project and to building the organization and to the movement, who agree to debating issues and votes and voting as a block and building collective power, who agree to like, and want, not just agree to, but want to and care about democratizing information, democratizing these processes, bringing people in who are running not for themselves to be elevated and celebrated, but because they believe in the movement. Oftentimes these are people who, are basically like sort of like, I don't want to do this, but somebody's got to, and people keep asking me, so fine, I'll do it, like the reluctant sort of candidate. And to me, that's like an accountability thing that I understand. I don't think there's anything we can do in terms of like, you know, will you agree to this list of things, or will you like, that isn't deeply attached to our organization that would make me feel like an elected is going to be really committed to our organization above all else. I think that like, and I think that because of the way we elected our state electeds in New York, their campaigns were run by our organization. Our organization brought in like thousands of volunteers who like passionately devoted their lives to their campaigns. They saw in action what it means to be part of like a movement and be elected, not by like a small team of consultants hiring like a small team of staff, but by hundreds and thousands of volunteers who are there literally just because they care passionately about something bigger than that one candidate. And that built relationships and trust that I don't think we have on the federal level, because we haven't had those relationships with those candidates. But I don't know if I don't know if that answers the question, but I guess what I'm saying is what I think of as accountability is sort of what we're building in Socialists in Office. Like it's a really special thing. We're in really early days of it. But it's there's so many forces at work once somebody is in office. I 100%, after working in Albany for a year, understand how the most well-intentioned, like principled person could get elected to the state legislature and within like 6 months just be deflated and defeated by the forces there, because everything there is designed. Zoran actually said it really well, I think in a Jacobin article, but like the way everything is designed, it's designed to get legislators to just bend to what power wants, what the leadership wants. And the only way to not do that, at least right now, is to have like tons and tons of people in an organization that you're working with to change that.
I think we want to have one more question and bring this the Q&A to a close at about 8:15. So Eric Stoll is next.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks everybody. I have a question around field and the extent to which we are doing it differently than, normal campaigns per the framework of the document. My only experience so far on campaigns in New York DSA was as a canvassing lead for the Michael Hollingsworth campaign. And I had an incredible experience and learned so much and was really impressed with a lot of things. But I also felt like there was a missed opportunity to make canvassing a more political experience, a lot of missed opportunities for kind of intentional recruitment. And just some of the ideas that come to my head about what that would look like would be, at the top of every canvas, just a quick, what is DSA? What is our theory of change? How does electoral play into that? But also training, kind of experienced DSA canvassers to pair up with new DSA members or new just non-DSA canvassers. And on the canvas, talk to them a little bit about DSA, try and build a relationship, set up a one-on-one later. And so I'm curious, like, is that kind of thinking, is that part of our field strategy currently? And if not, do you think it should be? And where should I go if I want to help do that? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done that different ways on different campaigns. It seems to me like being a field lead and getting involved in electoral working groups field campaign would be the right place to go. I think, and I think, I think those seem like really good ideas and we should do them. The only thought I have there is like, if you're around like other campaigns and other campaign people, it is really noticeable like what an NYC-DSA campaign is like. So like I canvassed for Joel Brooks in Jersey City last weekend, and and Carrie Tilton, who worked on Brandon West's campaign, is running their field out there. And you walk into the field office and you're like, you can tell it's an NYC-DSA campaign. In a bunch of ways, like in the way people conduct themselves to like volunteers, take them seriously politically, take them seriously in terms of what their time is and what their intelligence is, in the way that a lot of people are involved. I'm saying, like, I think it's really good to be more intentional about recruiting and politicizing people, and I think there are ways in which the politics is embodied in the practice.
Tascha, you want to say anything, or should I move on? I've been persuaded by the comrades to take 2 more questions and go to 8:25. So unless our guests have to leave, we'll do that. Okay, next is Lou Grupper.
Hi, thank you. First of all, I enjoyed both speakers. I really want to thank you for your presentations. It was excellent. I think the New York City electoral strategy is excellent, but it only goes up through 2017, and it definitely needs to be updated. And I was wondering if there are a couple of lessons we've learned from the SIO that that you would care to present that would help to update that strategy for now. That's one thing. The other thing is, I remember even back, in Bernie's campaign, 2015-16, there were, when DSA was just starting to get into electoral strategy, that there was a, we're a big tent, and there was a large block. There was a large resistance to, doing electoral work back then. And I knew a couple of people who were, who were at the resistance stage. Not me. I've been electoral since way back then. But now I know one way it's formed. I'm in the labor branch, and one thing I've seen how that's taken form there is that there is a large block of folks who really, they want to do the labor work. We got to get in the shop floor. We got to build a base there. We got to get blah, 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 blah. But they oppose it to the electoral work and instead of seeing how the two feed into each other. So I've seen that, from my own experience. Just figured I'd pass that along. Thank you.
Michael or Tascha, you want to say anything?
Just quickly on the electoral strategy, I think that what we need, and I think, I've probably been working towards this whole past year, is like a socialist in office strategy that's sort of the same, that maps things out in a clear way in the way that the electoral strategy does. And, I think that, like I said before, it's a lot more complex, I think. But a lot of the things are sort of similar in that, we kind of instead of holding distinct relationships with specific people in power, we have this mission to bring people in and figure out how to train people to do different things. And there's I will say just a bounty of possibility in there, almost more than we can process. And I think one big thing we have to do is also figure out how to scale the Socialist in Office Committee itself within DSA. So it becomes a place much like electoral has been, where people can be I want to work on legislative work. I want to work on district organizing. I want to help with this very specific deep organizing project through Marcella's office. And there's a sort of clear trajectory for that. And I think we're getting there, and hopefully we're going to see that develop a lot more specifically over the next few months. But I guess I would just answer that part to say we need a version of the electoral strategy for the socialists in office, I think.
Michael, anything?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think if I were the big things that seem unanswered to me about NYC-DSA's electoral strategy right now are to what extent are we hitting the limits of the sort of messaging and strategy that we're pursuing now, right? Are there 10 more assembly seats we can win in New York City, or are there only 3, right? And like, can we win upstate? Like, how are we, like, what sort of like, are we at a ceiling, or can we keep going the way we're going? I think our messaging and our social base will probably need to change for us to get to like the majority that I think we need. So that's one set of questions. And then I think the other is just like, what do we, I think we're at a point of maturity as an organization where we can start asking ourselves where we want to be in 10 years in a way that I think would have been futile in 2018. Like, I think we collectively didn't share enough political experience. Can we win in Buffalo? Yeah. We didn't share enough political experience to have a very serious conversation about that. And I think now we do. So that's where I would be wrestling with it. Like, do we think we can pass single payer in New York State? Like, on what timeline? What would be the metrics? Questions like that. And then in terms of like labor branch anti-electoralism, I think that labor organizing is about quality more than quantity, right? Like, it goes deeper, it stays focused, it like, and especially for people who are pursuing the rank and file strategy. And I think those are complementary, but I also think they appeal. I can understand why people feel both ways. Anyway, sorry, next question.
Okay, this will be the last one. This is Emily Lumberman.
Hi, Tascha and Michael. Thank you so much for what you all said today. One thing I was curious if you had any thoughts on. I think we always try to find candidates who sort of have some sort of organizing home, both within DSA, but outside of DSA. But I'm kind of curious to hear how you think we might do a better job of bringing more of, those people who aren't already members of DSA into DSA when we do our electoral work. I was a volunteer on Michael Hollingsworth's campaign this year. And, sometimes the Crown Heights Tenant Union would come and canvass with us, but, it didn't seem like there was any way to kind of retain those volunteers, and maybe not as many of those volunteers as would have been good. And so I was curious to hear if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think when we're talking about like the interplay between different projects, like actually like a funny thing that I don't think I've said during this is that I think there's a real, that our electoral work is like super complementary to our socialist and office work, especially as we build out the district organizing work. So I'm so glad that you used Michael Hollingsworth and the Crown Heights Tenants Union as an example, because in our district organizing work in Farah's office, we have a couple people from the Crown Heights Tenants Union who've been doing like district organizing outreach and constituent services volunteering with us. And I think also to the earlier question about like, how are we recruiting, this sort of is about both like recruiting people through canvassing. One of the challenges of electoral work is that you have a timeline, you have really specific goals that you have to meet in a short period of time. We've all knocked on doors. We know that people will like close that door pretty quickly, and you have this like finite amount of time to say like the exact thing that will perk up somebody's interest and start a conversation. So we can't always be doing the things at doors that we want to be doing during electoral campaigns, but that's why the socialist and office district organizing stuff is so exciting, because there is, again, I would say like more possibility than we know how to manage yet. And I think our huge challenge for the next like 6 months is to figure out a structure for our organization to be able to manage this work. but there is just so much opportunity for us to organize deeper, the sort of like deeper organizing that I think people are very hungry for in the districts of our electeds. And I think that actually is a space that allows us, because we'd be working through an elected's office, it allows us to talk to people from a totally different lens. It allows us to knock on every door, a thing we just definitely can't do during electoral campaigns strategically. It allows us to spend 15, 20 minutes at a door if we want to, which is another thing that's really hard to do during electoral campaigns. And it's something that we've only really like barely tapped into this year, because it's actually like a huge, massive project. I will say, like, if I can put my email in the chat and anybody here is particularly interested in district organizing, I'm working on some stuff right now and would absolutely love your input, love your help, like moving that forward and building out a structure. But yeah, I think that like our electoral work and our district organizing work, I can see really clearly how they're going to be super complementary to each other in terms of like exactly what you're talking about, Emily, like bringing people in and retaining people in the organization.
Okay, I think that should wrap up the Q&A, and I'll pass things along to Jeremy Cohen for some announcements.
Great. Hi, I'm Jeremy, he, him, an organizer of the night school, as well as the co-chair of the chapter currently. Thank you so much, Tascha and Michael, for your presentation and for all your work in figuring out how we move the ball forward, take the next concrete steps to actually transforming this ragged, decaying democracy. We have a few announcements as per usual at the end of night school. If you're not from NYC, they may not be totally directly related to you, but our next session, which I believe will be in person, is on the working class and the labor movement. We were already talking some about that tonight. Laura Gabby is going to present, who is a member of the NPC and a carpenter and a labor organizer herself. So you want to be there for that. It will be, I guess, Striketober will be done, but there will be much still to discuss. Maybe we'll have a Strike-Govember. I'm not a Twitter person, so I don't know how to coin these things. Other than that, if you're a North Brooklyn member, you have lots of ballots in your email probably right now, endorsement ballots on 2 candidates who are seeking our endorsement. Also elections for our organizing committee and for our citywide leadership. If you don't have a ballot, please contact the branch. If you do have, and the email's in there, and if you do have a ballot, vote, please, ASAP. We talked a lot about elections and the need to develop a statewide strategy. There's 2 races, as people in the chat were referring to, going on right now that matter to us as NYC-DSA and sister chapters. One is India Walton, of course, in Buffalo, who needs our help. She, her opponent is not to be laughed at, and it would be a huge loss for the movement if she didn't win. And so all hands on deck to help India out. 20-something NYC-DSA members took cars up there this last weekend. You can phone bank, donate, please help out India. And then also Joel Brooks over in New Jersey, running for city council, and can use some of that NYC-DSA love in the next couple weeks before the general election. Finally, just 2 other quick announcements. The Taxi Workers Alliance is doing an ongoing protest for debt forgiveness for medallion drivers. Our Assemblyman Zoran Mamdani is on a hunger strike to support their movement, and they're doing, among others, Ghislaine Kaur and others, and they're doing daily pickets outside of City Hall Park. So if you can show up, please show up to support relief for the terrible injustice that's been done to a lot of these immigrant workers by the city. And finally, on the labor question generally, the healthcare working group is trying to do some organizing and mobilizing of rank and file members in unions in New York City to get them to ask their unions, to demand their unions support the New York Health Act and single payer. So we'll put their email address, they have phone banks and other things to help organize people within the labor movement. So that's what I got. Thanks again to our speakers so much, and to the night school crew, and have a good night, everybody.
Night.
Thank you so much.